There is no yellow sun here. That is the first thing he notices, falling through a sky the color of a bruise, over a world he does not recognize, in a body that suddenly does not answer the way it should. The last thing he remembers is a tear in the air above Metropolis, a wrongness that swallowed sound before it swallowed him. Now there is only wind and smoke on the horizon, and the ground rushing up far too fast for a man who has spent his whole life falling exactly as slowly as he chooses. He lands in a crater of his own making, in the middle of a field that isn't a field anymore. It was, once. You can still see the furrows under the ash, the burned stalks of some grain that will never be harvested. Rising out of the smoke around him are shapes that should not exist. Fortress, cathedrals with skulls carved into their buttresses, statues 40 feet tall wearing the same haunted expression, banners scorched and hanging limp in air that tastes like rust and old blood. Somewhere in the distance, something enormous is screaming, and it does not sound like it is dying. It sounds like it is hungry. He stands. His uniform is torn at the shoulder. That alone tells him something is different, because nothing tears this suit. Not really. Not without a fight he'd remember. He looks up for the sun and finds a dim, hostile ember of a star doing its best impression of one, and understands. In the specific, bone-deep way, he understands these things, that he is weaker here. Not powerless. Never powerless, but weaker. And in a place that clearly does not forgive weakness. The first people he meets are running from something, and that is enough to make the decision for him. He follows the sound of screaming instead of away from it, because that has always been the only navigation system he's ever needed. What he finds is a village, if you can call a huddle of prefab habs and a rockcrete wall a village under siege by things with too many limbs and too many teeth, green-skinned brutes roaring war cries in a language that is somehow both guttural nonsense and perfectly, horribly clear. A promise of violence for its own sake. Violence as celebration. Orks. He doesn't know the word yet. He will. He doesn't think. He never really has. In these moments, thinking is for later. For the after. When the people are safe and he can sit with what it cost. He moves. And even weakened, even under a sun that barely deserves the name. He moves faster than anything in that field has ever seen a man move. A greenskin swinging a cleaver the size of a door finds the cleaver simply gone, and the hand that took it closing, not unkindly, around its throat, setting it down outside the wall hard enough to daze it, and no harder. He will learn later that mercy is considered on this world a kind of madness. He does not know that yet, and if he did, he isn't sure it would change anything. It takes him 11 minutes to clear the field. He counts, because counting is a way of keeping himself steady in a world that has stopped making sense. 11 minutes, and not one villager killed in that time. And not one orc killed by his hand either. He throws them, he grounds them, he breaks their weapons and sends them running into the waste with nothing but bruises and a story they'll probably improve with every retelling. It is only afterward, catching his breath in a way he is not used to having to do, that he understands how strange this makes him look to the people watching from the wall. They do not cheer. That's the first wrongness he clocks, standing in the settling dust with orcish weapons scattered around him like a boy's abandoned toys. On his world, this is the part where people cheer, where somebody's kid runs up and asks if that's really him, where the local news chopper is already inbound. Here, the villagers watch him with the flat, ashen expression of people deciding whether the new threat is worse than the old one. An old woman near the front makes a warding sign against her chest, thumb, and 2 fingers, the shape of a stylized eagle. A man beside her lifts a loss rifle he can barely hold steady and does not lower it. "I'm not going to hurt you," he says. And here's how thin that sounds on a world where those words have probably been the opening line of 100 atrocities. Nobody answers him. But nobody shoots, either, and he decides to call that progress. It is the local garrison commander, a woman named Ismali Voth, missing 2 fingers on her left hand and carrying herself like someone who has buried more friends than she can name, who finally steps forward far enough to speak to him directly. She does not lower her weapon. She does not need his help to know what her orders are. She radios command before she says a single word to him, and only steps closer once she's confirmed there is, at minimum, No immediate directive to fire. You're not Imperial, she says. Not a question. No, he agrees. I'm not from here at all. My name's Cal. Where I'm from, people call me Superman, but that doesn't mean anything here, does it? Nothing does, Voth says. Until command decides what it means. But there's something in the way she says it, tired rather than hostile, that tells him she isn't the wall he'll need to get past. She's just the first one. He spends 3 days near that settlement. And in those 3 days, he learns more about the shape of this universe than he ever wanted to. He learns that the ember star above them is called Sol by no one here, that this galaxy is not his at all, folded into his own by some rupture in reality he still doesn't understand and may never get the chance to. He learns that the wall he cleared wasn't protecting a village so much as a supply depot for something called the Astra Militarum, and that the people inside it are not civilians so much as conscripts, workers, and the families of both kept alive because the war machine needs them more than it needs to protect them. He learns the word heretic gets used more often than the word please. He learns, watching a young trooper no older than 19 flinch every time he moves too quickly, that his existence here reads less like a miracle and more like a variable nobody accounted for. And that in this galaxy, unaccounted for variables tend to get shot on principle, just in case. What he doesn't learn, not for those 3 days, is why any of this keeps happening, why every settlement he passes carries the same scars, why the soldiers talk about the last war and the current war and the next war in the same breath, as if peace were a rumor from a book none of them have read. He starts to understand it is not a rumor. It simply does not exist here. There is no peacetime to return to. There is only the war, continuous, generational, metastasized into the culture itself until asking, when will this end? Reads, as a kind of naivety nobody has the patience for anymore. He tries to help the way he knows how. He rebuilds the section of wall the Orks tore down, moving rockcrete blocks that would take a servitor crew a week to shift, done before nightfall. He carries water, actual water, hauling tanks from a cracked aquifer 3 miles out because the settlement's reclamation system failed months ago and nobody with the authority to fix it has bothered to send parts. He sits with the wounded, and it is here, more than in any battle, that he starts to understand the gulf between his world and this one. A soldier with a shattered leg thanks the Medicae, thanks the Emperor, thanks anyone and anything, except the alien standing over her who used his own hands to set the bone straight because there was no time to wait for proper care. When he tells her she doesn't need to thank the Emperor for this, she looks at him with something close to fear. Everything is thanks to him, she says. Even you. Even this. If he didn't will it, it wouldn't happen. He doesn't argue. He's starting to understand that on this world, that isn't a metaphor. It's closer to a physical law, an operating system running underneath everything, and arguing with it is like arguing with gravity pointless, and liable to get you branded something worse than an alien. A heretic. A thing to be purged rather than reasoned with. The Inquisition finds him on the 4th day, and they do not knock. He is aware of them before Voth's people are the particular hum of a gravitic engine cutting through the wind, the shimmer of stealth fields not quite hiding a trio of black gunships against the ash-gray sky. He could run. Some part of him honestly considers it, weighing what he knows of this place against the very reasonable fear that interrogation here might mean something closer to vivisection than conversation. But running has never been who he is, on any world, under any sun. And so he stands in the open where they can see him plainly, hands loose at his sides, and waits. The woman who steps off the lead gunship wears no mask, which he will later understand is itself a kind of statement. She does not need to hide her face from something she does not consider dangerous enough to warrant the theater. Her name, when she finally offers it, is Inquisitor Coraline Esch of the Ordo Xenos. And she has the specific, unhurried calm of someone who has personally ended 1,000 threats larger than the one currently standing in front of her, or at least believes she has. "You've been busy," she says by way of greeting, glancing at the rebuilt wall, at the empty water tanks now full, at the villagers watching from a distance with expressions Cal still can't fully read. Word travels faster than you'd think, out here. A man who stops bullets. A man who moves faster than a sentinel and doesn't kill anything that attacks him. Do you know how rare that last part is? Restraint is not a virtue this galaxy rewards. Where I'm from, it's not optional, he says. It's the whole point. Ish studies him for a long moment, and there is something almost like respect in it, buried under the professional wariness. You're going to need to come with us. Not as a prisoner, not yet, but as a subject of significant imperial interest. I'd rather you agree to that willingly. It would save us both a very tedious conversation about the alternative. He could refuse. He's fairly certain, even weakened, he could put every ship in this small fleet on the ground without much effort, and some coiled, tired part of him. The part that has spent 4 days watching a civilization treat suffering as a fact of weather genuinely considers it. But he thinks of Voth, of the young trooper thanking a god for a broken leg he set with his own hands, of what happens to a settlement that the Inquisition decides has been compromised by contact with something unknown. He has seen enough of this world already to know that his refusal wouldn't just cost him, it would cost them. I'll come, he says. But I want your word, nothing happens to this settlement because of me. You're assuming my word means something to you, Ish says, not unkindly. But you have it, for what it's worth. It is worth more than he expects, and less than he needs. And that turns out to be the exact shape of every promise made to him on this world from that point forward. The ship that carries him away from that field is nothing like the yacht-smooth cruisers he's used to riding in on his own Earth, when he rides in anything at all. It groans. It smells of promethium and old prayer incense, and something underneath both that he eventually identifies as fear, worn so deep into the metal that it has become simply part of the ship's smell, the way old houses smell of every dinner ever cooked in them. He is given a cabin, not a cell, though the distinction feels academic given the armed presence outside his door at all hours. Aish visits him twice a day, ostensibly to talk. Actually, he understands this quickly to test him. What does he think of the God Emperor? What does he think of Xenos life? What would he do, faced with a choice between one life and 1,000? He answers honestly every time, and every time he watches her write something down that he is fairly sure isn't flattering. It's on the 5th day of that voyage that the ship is attacked, and it's here that the story properly widens, because the things attacking it are not orcs, and they are not anything he's ever fought before, and their arrival changes what everyone aboard understands about why he's here at all. The alarms are a physical sensation before they're a sound, a bone-deep wrongness that makes even the ship's crew, hardened as they are, go pale in a way Cal hasn't seen from them yet. Aish is at his door within seconds, sidearm drawn but pointed at the floor, her earlier composure fractured into something sharper. Necrons, she says, like the word itself costs her something. A tomb fleet. This deep in the sector that shouldn't be possible, there's no recorded. She stops herself, visibly recalibrating, the way people do when a professional catastrophe collides with a personal one. You're going to want to see this. He follows her to the bridge, and through the viewport he sees them for the first time. Ships like flayed metal skeletons, moving with a silence that unsettles him more than any roar ever could, arrayed in formations that look less like a fleet and more like a diagram, cold and geometric and utterly without the chaos of living warfare. Green light blooms across their hulls in patterns that remind him, distantly and horribly, of a heartbeat that has forgotten what it's for. They shouldn't be interested in a single inquisitorial cruiser, Esh murmurs, mostly to herself, before her eyes cut to Cal with a new and unwelcome understanding. Unless it's not the cruiser they want. He doesn't get the chance to ask what she means. The ship rocks under an impact that shouldn't have been able to touch its void shields. And within a minute, the same silent, skeletal figures that were only lights on a view screen are aboard, cutting through corridors with weapons that don't so much wound as unmake, erasing whatever they touch atom by atom. He fights because there's nothing else to do, because the alternative is watching people he's known for 5 days die in a hallway that smells like prayer incense and fear, and for the first time since he arrived on this world, he lets himself stop holding back quite so carefully. He is not merciful with the Necrons. There is nothing in their silent, patient advance that reads as anything he could show mercy to. They do not seem to want, or fear, or hope. They simply proceed, the way water proceeds downhill, indifferent to what stands in the way. He clears 3 corridors before the thing that came for him actually finds him, and when it does, he understands immediately that everything before this moment was a formality. It does not look like the others. Taller, its frame etched with symbols that hurt slightly to look at directly, its optics burning the low, ancient green of something that predates every empire currently squabbling over this galaxy's corpse. It speaks, and its voice arrives not through the air but directly into the part of his mind that processes language, cold and vast and utterly, without malice, which is somehow worse than malice would have been. Biological anomaly, it says. Signature inconsistent with all catalogued life in this galactic arm. You are not of this reality. No, Cal says. I'm not. Then you are not owed the courtesies extended to citizens of this galaxy. The thing continues, with the flat, bureaucratic horror of something that has had eternity to refine its cruelty into policy. You are an intrusion. Intrusions are catalogued, then removed. What follows is the hardest fight of his life, and he understands within the first 30 seconds why this is not an enemy that tires, that bleeds, that can be worn down by sheer persistence the way flesh and blood things can. It repairs itself between blows. It does not flinch from pain because pain, for it, is a concept rather than an experience. He breaks it apart 3 times, and 3 times its constituent pieces crawl back together with the patient. Horrible indifference of a river finding its way around a rock. He begins, for the first time since he fell into this galaxy, to genuinely understand what it might feel like to lose, not to be beaten. Exactly, but to simply run out of ways to matter to an opponent that has already outlasted 100 civilizations and fully intends to outlast this one too. It's Ish, in the end, who changes the equation, not with a weapon capable of hurting the thing, but with information. A Xenos, lore data slate, salvaged from some older, costlier campaign that identifies the resonance frequency capable of disrupting a Necron reanimation field just long enough to matter. She screams the frequency at him across the ruined corridor, over the sound of tearing metal, and he does the only thing he can think to do with it, claps his hands together hard enough to crack the hull plating, generating a shockwave tuned, as best he can manage in the half-second he has to think about it, to that exact pitch. It works. Not perfectly, the Necron Lord staggers, its self-repair stuttering, giving him the one opening he's had in the entire fight, and he takes it, driving it back through the hull and out into the vacuum of space itself, where he finally has room to fight the way he actually knows how to fight, without a corridor's walls to worry about, without a crew's lives hanging on every miscalculated blow. It takes him another 6 minutes to render the thing inert, not destroyed, he suspects. Nothing he does could actually destroy it, not truly. Not against the kind of eternity a Necron measures itself in, but scattered far enough and disrupted long enough that its distant fleet finally, mercifully, withdraws. He returns to the ship bleeding from a dozen small wounds that shouldn't be possible, exhausted in a way that has nothing to do with muscle and everything to do with the particular horror of an enemy that simply does not care whether it wins or loses because it has all the time that exists to try again. Aish meets him in the ruined corridor, and for the first time since he met her, there's no test in her expression, just something rawer. They came for you specifically, she says. Not the ship. Not the sector. You. Do you understand what that means? That I'm a problem, Cal says. That you're a prize, Esh corrects. A biological pattern that has never existed in this galaxy before, with capabilities that exceed nearly everything we've cataloged. To them, you're not a threat to be destroyed, your data to be acquired. And where the Necrons take an interest, others follow. You've been here 5 days, and already 2 separate factions have decided you're worth risking a fleet over. I would very much like to know why, before a third one shows up with better odds. It's a fair question, and it's one nobody on this ship, nobody in this whole vast, grinding galaxy has an answer to. He doesn't have one either. He was pulled through a tear in reality with no warning and no explanation, and every day since has only compounded the mystery instead of resolving it. But watching Aisha's face, seeing genuine fear there for the first time, instead of professional calculation, he understands something else, something that matters more than the mystery of why he's here. Whatever he decides to do next, It isn't going to be a quiet decision. Every choice he makes on this world ripples outward into a war that was already burning long before he arrived, and will keep burning long after, whether or not he finds his way home. They reach the fleet rendezvous point 2 days later, battered and short-handed, and it's there that the true scale of what he stepped into finally becomes clear. Aisha's superiors, a tribunal of senior inquisitors who arrive aboard a ship so vast it makes the cruiser look like a lifeboat, do not greet him as a guest. They greet him as evidence, walking him through a gauntlet of scans, interrogations, and theological assessments that stretch across 3 exhausting days. He answers every question honestly. He refuses every request to demonstrate his abilities for the sake of demonstration alone, offering instead to help wherever there's an actual need, and is met, more often than not, with the same suspicious confusion Voth showed him on the very first day. The idea that strength, without an angle, without a cost extracted, without some doctrine attached to justify it, doesn't compute here. It reads as a trick nobody has found the seam of yet. It's on the 3rd day that he's finally brought before the tribunal's ranking member, an ancient, augmetic-laced inquisitor lord named Herrick Voss, whose voice sounds like it hasn't been raised in genuine warmth in decades and probably never will be again. You understand our dilemma, Voss says, without preamble. You are powerful beyond nearly anything in our arsenal, and you answer to no doctrine we recognize. You will not kill needlessly. You will not swear fealty. You will not even accept the courtesy of being afraid of us, which is, frankly, the part I find most unsettling. Every asset this Imperium fields is bound by something: faith, fear, engineering, indoctrination. You are bound by none of it. That makes you either our greatest weapon or an infection we have not yet found the shape of. I'm not a weapon, Cal says. I never have been. I help because it's the only thing that's ever made sense to me, not because someone tells me to, and not because I'm afraid of what happens if I don't. That, Voss says, is precisely the problem. An asset that cannot be commanded is not an asset. It is a variable. And variables, in a galaxy this starved for certainty, are rarely permitted to remain variables for long. He is given, in the end, the same 3-cornered ultimatum he suspects every unclassifiable thing eventually receives from this Imperium, though Voss frames it with more honesty than Cal expects. Submit to full doctrinal indoctrination and become, formally, a sanctioned asset of the Ordo Xenos, stripped of the freedom to choose his own battles. Be quietly and permanently contained, for the safety of the Imperium's fragile theological order, in a stasis vault deep enough that even the Necrons couldn't find him, or be released, unaligned, into a galaxy that has already shown twice in a single week how badly it wants to claim him for itself. He listens to all 3. He thinks of Voth, and the water tanks, and the trooper thanking a god for a leg he set with his own 2 hands. He thinks of the Necron Lord's flat, patient voice, promising to catalog and remove him like a filing error. He thinks of his own Earth, an ocean of realities away, and Lois, and the particular color of a sky lit by a sun that has never once made him feel small. None of those, he says finally. I won't be your weapon, and I won't be your prisoner, and I'm not interested in being anyone's unclaimed treasure either. But I'll tell you what I will do. I'll help where I can, on my own terms. For as long as I'm stuck here, not because your Emperor commands it, and not because I'm afraid of what you'll do if I refuse, but because that's who I am. On every world I've ever stood on. If that's not good enough for the Imperium, then we have a problem. But it's the only offer I've got. Voss studies him for a long, silent moment, and something in his augmetic scarred face suggests this is not the first time he's heard an answer like that, though it may be the first time he's heard it from something powerful enough to make refusing it a genuine risk. You understand, Voss says at last, that this galaxy does not reward the unaligned. Idealism, unattached to doctrine, unattached to fear, it does not last here. It gets ground down, or it gets buried, or, if it is very lucky and very careful, it gets tolerated at the edges for exactly as long as it remains more useful alive than dead. I do not know which of those futures awaits you. I suspect you don't either. Maybe not, Cal says. But I've been ground down before, and I've come back from it every time. I'd rather find out what this galaxy does to someone who refuses to bend than spend the rest of my life wondering. They do not kill him. They do not chain him. What they do, in the end, is simpler and colder than either. They let him go, with a quiet, unspoken understanding that he will be watched, catalogued, and used the moment he's useful, and abandoned the moment he's not, and that no promise made to him in this room carries any real weight beyond the length of the current crisis. It is not trust. It is not even alliance. It is the particular, exhausted détente of a galaxy that has learned, across 10,000 years of unbroken war, that even things it doesn't understand are sometimes worth leaving alone. For now, he leaves that ship the same way he arrived in this galaxy. Alone, under a sky that isn't his, carrying a weight that has nothing to do with gravity. He spends the following months he loses count of exactly how many, in a galaxy where time itself seems to move differently across sectors, doing the only thing that has ever made sense to him. He answers distress calls the Astra Militarum can't reach in time. He pulls survivors from bombed hab blocks the Administratum has already written off as acceptable losses. He does not convert anyone. He does not preach. He does not, no matter how many times he's asked, kneel before a golden throne he's never even seen, on a planet he has been quietly, deliberately steered away from every time his path has drifted too close to it. Word of him spreads anyway, the way it always does, not as an official imperial sanction, but as rumor whispered between conscripts and remembrancers, and the kind of people who've stopped expecting help to come from anywhere official. Some call him a saint they haven't been told about yet. Some call him a heretic, too useful to purge. He answers to neither, because in the end, on this world as on his own, the labels other people reach for have never been the thing that actually moves him. What moves him is simpler, and it turns out to be sturdy enough to survive the transition between galaxies intact. Somewhere, someone is in danger, and he is capable of doing something about it, and that has always been reason enough. Whether that will be reason enough forever, in a galaxy built entirely around the idea that idealism eventually gets ground into doctrine or dust, is a question even he doesn't have the answer to yet. The war here does not pause for one man's convictions, however powerful he is. The Orks will return, the Necrons have not forgotten him, and things that measure patience in millennia rarely give up so easily. Chaos, whatever it truly is, has not yet turned its full attention his way, and when it does, everyone who has met him agrees, quietly, it will be the fight that finally tests what he's actually made of. But for now, on a battlefield lit by a dim and hostile sun, a figure in a torn blue and red uniform stands between a column of terrified refugees and an advancing tide of green-skinned raiders, and does not move, and does not run, and does not need a doctrine or a god to tell him why he's standing there at all. In a galaxy that has forgotten, across 10,000 years of unbroken war, what it looks like for someone to help without demanding anything in return, that alone is its own kind of impossible. The grim darkness of the far future does not end because one man refuses to become what it expects of him, but for the people still alive behind him, still breathing because he chose, again, to stand between them and the dark for them. Tonight, it is enough that someone remembered what hope was supposed to look like and brought it with him anyway, even into a galaxy that had almost forgotten the shape of the word.